Hello, and welcome to the Elevate Entrepreneur, where we decode the success of some of the greatest entrepreneurs that I've met, that I know, that I trust. These individuals have not only built their business up, but they've also impacted lives for the better. Here you will learn not only how to grow your business, but also inspire you to want to be just a little bit better. I'm your host, Raylan Davis. My entire intention is to remove obstacles and excuses as to why people can't realize they deserve more. With that being said, let's jump into this week's episode. Stay motivated, stay elevated. My guest today, meet Miss Brandie De La Rosa, the founder and CEO of E3inspire and an expert in IT, business analytics, and psychology. Brandie is also a motivational speaker, international author, and passionate community leader on a mission to address domestic violence epidemic. Her company, E3inspire, provides trauma-informed care for businesses and individuals using technology, emotional intelligence, and to empower victims to transition from survivors to thrivers. A single mother of two, Brandie is a true inspiration, leading by example and encouraging others to live a life of purpose and impact. And Brandie, once again, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Okay, so the first kind of thing I wanted to ask you about was your journey to being this person that can help lead the way for victims to become the people that are victors, right? I think, it's really, I don't want to say it's easy, but you see this often, unfortunately, where people get locked into this victim mindset. They can't move past the trauma in their lives. And then here comes you, the Sherpa, if you will, to take them on that journey. So talk to me a little bit about your journey from, going from where you started to how you got to here, where you're, in my mind, the Sherpa of individuals who maybe are stuck in that victim mindset and can move forward. You're helping them kind of see a better life and impact. But how did you get here?
Sure. So, I will share, I had a very successful career, had the family, the white picket fence, lifestyle, everything you could ever want and think is perfect from external optics. Internally was turmoil at home life. And I decided to leave the situation, and in doing so, still had the great career, but mentally kind of had that breakdown and couldn't figure out why I was stuck, as you said. And years removed, I was still in that space. I had actually sought out counseling and realized, kind of had PTSD on the first couple of sessions. And I kind of said, this is why I'm not coming to a counselor, because you guys are going to just, pre-diagnose me PTSD. I'm not in the military. I associated it with only being in the military. And with that, I left, but it sparked a curiosity as to what PTSD actually is. And that led me down a path of actually re-enrolling into a degree of psychology. My first degree is computer science, but re-enrolling and educating myself on what that meant. And then I learned the whole world of actual trauma. And those things that were impacting me was exactly what I was living. And so through that, I started educating myself on, why my brain works the way it does and how I can change it and fix it and get unstuck. And through that journey, I learned a lot. I learned from the neurological side of things, as well as just my thought pattern, the actions I was doing in my external life, how that was continually repeating the trauma, those types of conversations and things. So I came to a space where I wanted to reimagine trauma differently, and the support and not stay in that same mind space, and learning when you repeat it, the words and being around certain things, how it can cause you to relive it, basically retraumatize yourself. What could I do? How could I undo that? And with that, that's what lent myself to start my company. And I thought to myself, I'm not the only one, right? How do I bring other folks out of this? And so that's what I started doing. I started speaking on it. I remember the first time I spoke on a show, and I was actually traumatized by that. Everything that could go wrong technology-wise went down, 3 or 4 laptops, everything that could have went wrong. And I thought, this is why I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't speak out publicly about this, keep it behind closed doors. And at the end of that, the show actually got a ton of email responses as about how they're going through it and how it helped. So then it sparked me to be like, how else can I go about this, right? So that's kind of what started the whole journey.
Well, what's fascinating is that you noticed almost like, I don't want to use this the wrong way, but it sounds like you took responsibility and was like, I'm going to get myself out. But what's most interesting too is that how easy we when things go wrong, we use it as evidence to support the fact that we shouldn't be doing it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's what I did. I literally cried. If somebody could have been a fly on the wall, I put my head down and cried about, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Who's going to hear this? My kids at that point did not know because, like, things were kept. Well, I thought they didn't realize necessarily, but, now they're adults and we've had conversations and they, especially my oldest son remembers certain things that I thought he never knew about. And so it was one of those, like, oh my gosh, my kids are going to find out, family members, community, all of that. And I was just overwhelmed. But it was one of those things that I, in my journey, started going down the path of listening to different lectures, Wayne Dyer being one of them. If anybody's, knows who that is, he's passed away now, but I strongly recommend looking into his teachings. One of his teachings stood out to me, and one line specifically about taking the responsibility, right? And getting yourself out of the victim mindset. And it was not about what has happened to me, which is many times what I ask myself, why did this happen to me and so forth. It's not about the, why. It's more about what am I going to do? I was deemed strong enough to take on this responsibility and I need to do something with it. And that shifts your mind from the victim mindset. It's like having $1 million and you see somebody's hungry. I have this $1 million in my pocket, but I'm going to walk past and not give them money for food, right? So I have this knowledge and this experience of DV and that situation. Not that I wish it on anyone, but how did I get myself out of it and how do I help others, right? It's unfair for me to sit on this responsibility and not do anything with it. So from that moment, I actually have the card. I wrote it down on an index card and kept it in my office for years. And every time I would second guess myself, I would reread that and remind myself why I'm doing it. And it would push me further. And with that, I started getting out there in the public more, being asked to speak as a motivational speaker or be panelists or be on shows. And the more I did it, the more people would come up to me or reach out to me about how I impacted their lives. And to this day, that's what pushes me is like, okay, if I can help one person be that person that I didn't have when I was going through it, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, it reminds me of like, have you ever read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
No, I have not.
So it's about an individual who's going through the Holocaust, and he has a psychology background. So it's almost like him detailing essentially the reason why people were passing away from sickness and death, or sickness and famine and all those things. Was the key was they lost meaning to live. And there's a line in the book. It reminds me again of the trauma maybe that you've gone through. And let me know if this resonates with you at all. But there's a rabbi that loses his wife and daughter in the Holocaust. A rabbi who then questions God. He questions his own existence. Like, why did this happen to me? What Victor said to him, and go, imagine that maybe God gave you this suffering because he knew you could withstand the weight. Like this was for you. And so I think as people that, and the listeners that have heard this for a while, like know that, I'm a domestic violence survivor. I'm not sure how to word it, but that's how I looked at it from the beginning was, no, now I have something that I can give to others. And I noticed this even when I was going through school, and that I just had this extra set of thick skin that most of my classmates didn't have. And I was like, oh, this is actually something that I can use for me. So it sounds like, again, that allowed you to have purpose. And then once you found your purpose, it began this motivation to keep going every single day. Like there's someone out there that needs me. And if I don't speak up, who will?
Absolutely. And that became my power, right? That's if you think of electricity, that's kind of like where my power source is I literally draw from that. And it's come full circle. So my children, I thought they would I had never spoken about their father. They had a great relationship with their father. We co-parented. We got past that hurdle afterwards. And, but when they did find out, it was a very, very difficult conversation. My oldest was in college, my youngest was in high school, and it was very difficult, but they've addressed it with their father, addressed it with me. It was one of those things where, I chose a path of healing, and I spoke with them about that and said, my oldest son originally wanted to, hear the details. He shared some stories that he remembered, but also wanted to know some some details. And I said, honestly, son, that's not something I'm comfortable with. I've let that go. And to ask me to re-detail that is going to cause me to re-traumatize myself. And I'm choosing not to. And he respected that. And I thought to myself, this is where we've got to start coming to a space as victims or survivors, if you will. Be it's not just a woman's thing. It's not just a man's thing. It's, across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're, a doctor, a judge, a police officer, corporate, America person. It's remove the stigmatism of who it is, right, in life, and learning to address how to get over it and through it, more importantly. So that's where I use that power source of that's what's going to push me and motivate me and make sure that I am that voice for those that have not been able to speak up yet, and those unfortunately that have lost their voice because they were killed because of this, and they may have been able to get out of it sooner with support systems around them, but like myself, was too scared to say anything and kept it to themselves and unfortunately lost their voice. So because of that, again, it's my responsibility to not be quiet, be louder, prouder, and push forward.
Well, first of all, I commend you for that. But I think even more importantly for the people that you serve, I think what you're doing, it's not so much only about, hey, let's give them a voice so they can get out of the situation. It's the life after that. That's something people don't ever talk about that.
That's
like,
right.
No one ever talks about it. Like once you're out, there's a whole other side of it that no one talks about. And again, I'm sorry for the listeners who've heard this before, but one of the things that I always say that like with my own mother that went through this, my dad took her soul. She never was the same. And I'm thankful for people like you, because if she had someone like you during that time, she probably would have been able to find herself again and to take her power back, but she never got it back. And again, people don't realize that once that trauma happens, and even if even if you accept that it did happen, you never really, like, that victim kind of mindset starts to bleed in other areas of your life, which kind of brings me to the next question for you, which is like, talk to me a little bit about the difference between responsibility and ownership. Because I get in trouble sometimes when I talk about being a victim and like how you need to take responsibility now. And they go, no, it's not my fault. I'm like, I never said that. You got to take responsibility now. Like starting now, what happens? So maybe talk to me a little bit about ownership versus responsibility.
Yes, very, very good question. Great observation in that, and that is a key. And so I was part of an anthology, and one of my books is called Choices, or whether the book is Women of Courage, and then my piece of it is called Choices. And you're very, very true in that statement of responsibility versus ownership. Responsibility, no, I do not take responsibility for the action right against me. However, I do take ownership of the choices I made leading up to those actions, right? So when I wrote my book, it was extremely hard. I had to go internally, dig deep. Even I rewrote it a bunch of times. And when I finalized, or thought I finalized it, I let my children read it. And they even came back and said, Mom, who are you here writing this for? You softened what this was. You need to write it for those people that you're trying to help and who's going to read it. And they're like, you aren't digging deep enough. And it forced me to go in and say, wait a minute, I made choices along the way. I knew before I was, married, there had been signs, there had been things, and I chose to ignore them and chose to believe in the potential and, oh, I can fix it mentality. And then, the engagement happens and you're wrapped up into wedding planning. So I made the choice, coming from a Latino background, our culture, right? You get married young and you live forever with that person, good, bad, and the ugly, right? So I moved into the space of planning a wedding. It was rough, right? I made the choice to go ahead with that wedding. And then I made the choice to go ahead and become a mother, and getting pregnant and realizing, well, I'm in it now. It just is what it is. Having one child, knowing it was still wrong. And I continued to make the choice to continue that marriage and have another child. Now, I never will regret that. My children are the best things that ever happened to me. If I died tomorrow, that was my call to earth, right? But I did make that choice to stay in the situation all along. I could have left. I could have spoken out. I could have done some things differently, and I did not. So I have to take ownership of those choices, right? Not responsibility, ownership. With that being said, once I've left, as you said, your mother that had went through this, she never was the same. And I say that you're right in that, like almost like a military background, right? You got the young recruits that sign up for the military and they're all super motivated. They're going to go out there. They're going to change the world. They're fighting for their country. They're wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to rock. You've got the veterans that have killed people, have done things that they can't unsee, can't undo. And with that, they come back with a different perspective. Like, no, you don't want to be me on the other side, right? So I say that same thing with a victim. Like, you've got this innocence of a relationship, and then you come out the other side going, oh my gosh, I'm damaged and I don't know how to fix it. So with that, some people never learn how to come out of that. And when you are in a domestic violence situation, the broken bone or a black eye or bruises, those are easy. People think, oh my gosh, I could never. Oh no, that'll heal. That's the easy part. The hard part is the lifelong effects that leaves behind, like you said, damaging the soul. That's that post-traumatic, right? That's stress syndrome that we deal with, our mind. I like to, when I speak, I usually say, listen, if I was walking through the door with a set of crutches or in a wheelchair, the countless people would open the door for me, move aside for me to walk through the room. They would accommodate me. But when my brain is broken, right, because I'm dealing with this, I don't know how to concentrate. I don't, I may cry quickly, or I'm very anxious faster, or I break down, all of those things. People don't understand your brain has a hidden disability, right? Your brain's broken and they don't know how to interact with you. And even yourself, you don't know how to get over it. You don't know what's broken. You don't know how to fix it. And that's why I strongly recommend individuals to take care and introscope, look inward, read certain books. So I can give you a couple of, books that help me on my journey. I'm constantly reading, right? And learning about the mind. I don't learn about the trauma from the past. I learn about why trauma is and how do I fix it. And I, again, come from the neurology background in the sense of learning how the brain physically works. Now, I have two backgrounds, computer science and psychology. I used to think those were two different things like that were unrelated. I now realize through my studies that they are exactly the same. Your brain is a computer. So I say that to say there are connections that, just like a computer, you can plug and play. Your brain has connections. Those neurons, those can plug and play. You just unconnect and disconnect, right? Now it's learning how to do that. How do we do that? And there are several methods, and I can touch on those in a little bit. But starting off by just reading, and books that helped me, I will say, was Psycho-Cybernetics. I don't know if you've heard of that. I can share that with you. You can pass it to your listeners. But that's by Maxwell Maltz, I believe. Psycho-Cybernetics, even athletes, like Green Bay Packers, the coaches require them to carry that book around, right? It's on audiobook as well, so you can listen to it in your car. But it really teaches you how to change your mindset and really gives you specific practices on things you can do daily, little things you can do. Another book is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And your thoughts create things. It creates your reality. Good thoughts, bad thoughts. Your brain has no idea, just like a computer. I can mistype a word correct or type it correctly. The computer doesn't know whether that's good data, bad data. It just accepts the data and gives you the result. Period. Garbage in, garbage out, like we call it in IT, right? Same thing with your brain. You feed it negative things, rethinking about those negative thoughts of the trauma, or being around negative people, absorbing negative energies, negative programming from TV, from media, all of that. When you do that, you're feeding yourself garbage. Therefore, the results is going to be outwardly. You're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel some kind of way. You're not motivated. It's going to reflect in your job performance. It's going to reflect in your relationships, personal, romantic, with your kids, with your friends, colleagues. That's the results of the garbage, right? The data coming into your mind. So those books help really change that. Another book, I'm trying to think of what it was called, Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. Again, almost like when you buy a brand new BMW, guess what? A white BMW, you're going to see a bazillion white BMWs out there that you never noticed were there before. They were always there. You just didn't pick up on it. So again, learning how to program your mind really helps you get through that trauma. And trust me, when you become good at it, it's muscle memory, right? Your whole life will change.
Well, one thing that I love that you talk about here is it's the idea of exposure. Like one of the things I frequently bring up is like, if you're not exposed to new ways of thinking and ways to look at the world, you're going to have the same results. And it sounds like what you did was you dove into these books and then you discovered, oh, like I am kind of manifesting, if you will, like the life that I'm living. It's kind of like, for example, one of the things that I realized, even going back to like kind of the victim mindset, is that there's people that I've been around before where maybe something traumatic happened to them, but they constantly talked about how they were a survivor of this, they were a victim of this, and this happened, but that bled into their lives in other areas, and things just happened all the time. And so, I would talk to them and say, like, what if we just, for a couple days, maybe a couple weeks, what if every time you had that thought of mentioning that, hey, you're a survivor here and doing this, if you just chose not to do that, what would happen? And what's interesting is what happens is you stop acting like a victim. So there's this interesting balance, and I sometimes kind of teeter back and forth a bit, and I'm sure you maybe go through this as well, but even though it's like that's kind of your brand purpose, so it's a little bit different. But for me, it's like, okay, how often should I bring up this background that I lived in, and how can I articulate it that shows that I'm no longer a victim, but also doesn't hold me back anymore, if that makes sense? Because again, I know people that always talk about how they're a survivor of this or they're a victim of this, but in all areas of their life, they're also a victim. So what does that balance kind of look like of again, talking about it, but not reliving it again and again and keeping you in that mindset?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I people see it through how I live, right? So the proof is in the pudding, if you will. So what I say by that is it's good to still bring it up to a degree, because that gives you credibility. For example, if somebody came talking to me about, and whether it's DV or it's whatever that is, if somebody's talking to me about being a business owner, how to be a business owner, for example, and run a business, but then they've never talked about themselves owning a business, I would not feel like they're credible, right? I'd be like, well,
there's no context then, right?
But you never run a business, right? So you're talking to me about trauma, but you've never expressed that you could even understand it, right? So that's why I think it's very key and critical to touch on it, right? And I do. I have had to learn that throughout the years. Initially, I used to, be that person where that defined me. And I had somebody actually tell me years ago, one of my mentors told me, you are not, that trauma does not define you. And I, for the longest time, that's what my excuses were, like, well, this happened to me and this is why, and after sitting with myself with that statement, I thought, you know what, you're right. It doesn't define who Brandie is. Brandie is X, Y, and Z, and I'm thinking about what was my life like? Who was Brandie before the trauma? Now, granted, I was 16 when I met that person that, became my husband and so forth. But I know what type of personality I was at that age, right? I know I was very outgoing. I know I was, these types of things. I knew what type of life I wanted to live, and I had that bigger than life personality, right? I wanted her back. That's what I wanted back. And so then my search to find her became important to me. And so that balance is, never forgetting where you came from, but don't let it define where you're going. And that's what people have to understand. And unfortunately, again, if they don't learn how to address it and learn techniques to overcome it, it'll keep them stuck. And it is tough. And initially it's very tough. But once you get there, it's like I said, it's just a fine-oiled machine. The part that gets people is because we're, quote, in the rat race, right, of usually working. So it impacts us at work, right? And that's part of what my company is, right? Is, you go to work 8-10 hours a day. You can't flip that switch to say, okay, I won't think about this while I'm at work for 8 to 10 hours, especially if you're still living it, right? Sometimes people don't realize that.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
Or I had just got thrown down the stairs, right? So I was just thrown down these stairs, and I got to walk in and go to some corporate meeting and look like, $1 million and pretend like nothing's wrong. And then also in that same moment, understand that I've got to go home in a few hours and, be faced with all of this all over again. And how is that stressful on my job? And how am I supposed to perform at my best quality if all that's going on in my mind, right? And not being able to let anybody even know about this, right? And it's a balance at work. And so then things happen at work. I don't get that promotion because I didn't perform well, or my colleagues think I'm distant and not a team player because I'm not really engaged, because I can't be around. They don't understand. I can't be seen around male counterparts, right? I can't necessarily explain it. So all those factors that go into place, and people around me don't know it. My workplace doesn't know it. I'm dealing with all this craziness. I don't get the promotion, or I may lose my job, and so on and so forth. And then it keeps me stuck as is in that mental, oh my gosh, it's because I'm a victim. It's because. And that's just a tough space to be. But when you really surround yourself with great support systems or have avenues, and those support systems, a lot of people mistake those as shelters. Shelters are great. I think they have their place. Brandie personally didn't feel I wanted to take my 2 children to a shelter, uproot them from the lifestyle they were living into a place of unknown, into bunk beds of a bunch of strangers, right? That just didn't seem right to me, right? So I didn't. It was definitely harder on certain occasions and things I had to do. But needless to say, I took my own route. And then when I started speaking with others that had gone through this, that were CEOs, they were judges, they were very high-powered business owners. And I'm like, what in the world? I would have never thought. And then I started opening up. And that's what led to that. That's what really led to that momentum of moving forward. And again, putting those books into place. I'll tell you what really started my journey, honestly, was listening to, just going to YouTube, Law of Attraction. I know that sounds cliche, but like Wayne Dyer, that's how I first came across that lecture. And what did that look like? And that snowballed. I started doing, I think in one of his lectures, he referenced, meditation. And in my head, meditation was sitting with your legs cross-legged and that world. And I'm like, okay, that's not me. But it referenced just Googling guided meditation. And so that's what I did on YouTube. Started listening to it at nighttime when I went to sleep. Started listening to it as I was brushing my teeth in the morning. And that's what really got my mind thinking. And then it snowballed to, it became a lifestyle. It really became a lifestyle. I also started studying neuro-linguistic programming. What that means is how you speak. So I'll tell you. So I'm Mexican. And so I always say I'm Mexican, not a Mexicant. So, there's nothing I can't do in my household with my children. We all say the word can't, right? We never say, if this happens, then that. Nope. We say, when this happens, right? We live it as if, we say it as if we're living it. So those little tweaks in words, a lot of people will say things, for example, well, in the worst case scenario, I'll just do X, Y, Z. Why do you do that? Say the best case scenario is I get that promotion, I get that house, I get that whatever situation it is. Say best case scenario, start living that way. And again, it's those little small things. It just starts becoming habits.
Yeah, if you start actually living like the person you want to become, which, you mentioned something earlier and you said, I found Brandie before all those things. Do you feel like you found her, or did you build a new one? I feel like, because I feel like a lot of people, when they struggle through something, like, look, if your past wasn't that great, it's hard to imagine a better future. So the way around it, at least for me, was I just built a new Raylan. And it's a way better Raylan than I had before. So, like, I'm just curious, do you feel like you found the Brandie before that at 16, 15 years old, or did you just create and build a new one?
I think for me, it's a combination. I think I brought in the innocence, the optics of the world that I had pre-trauma, right? So Brandie before was happy-go-lucky. I didn't have fear of the world. Everybody was a nice guy, nice person. And I just, why would anybody hurt anybody? And I just wanted to be peace, love, and rainbows and butterflies, right? That was Brandie as a kid. That was Brandie as my teens. So I brought that back into this. But then I also, as you said, created the extension of that. And so the extension of that is, how do I help people? How do I take this piece of me and basically make it explode into inspiration and motivation for others? So my desire is, not just by helping the people I can physically touch, because I, do case management with individuals as well. So when they need things, I have a lot of partnerships, moving from houses, doing all these different things for the individual, helping them through court. I do all of those things. I physically can be around a person, right, and impact their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But my bigger goal is, how do I reach those by the extension of my arms? What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean, if I help you, for example, physically, I'm helping you, talking to you on the daily, I meet with you, get you moved into a new location, get you to safety, all those things. I'm working with Raylan one-on-one, right? You can call me, you can see me, or we're in the same room. You have little kids. Those little kids watch you go, they see me around you, right? They know dad gets helped through this. They're 6, 7 years old. Dad goes on to live this amazing life and doesn't turn back. You now have exposed them to all of that, and they remember this Brandie person from way back when was a turning point. They now go out and live their life because they saw their father do these great things through Brandie, even though I never exposed to help them directly, right? Now they go on to be great things in the world, and because of them doing great things, they impact other individuals that would have never even known Brandie existed, right? So that's what I mean by the extension of my arms. And I think the world needs more of that. So I said, I'm going to create it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring that innocence of optics forward, and I'm not going to look at the world in a negative space. If we turn on the TV, our phones, social media all day, every day is all negative, 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 negative. And it's good to be aware of that healthy amount of awareness of what's going on in the world, but don't spend hours on it. Don't focus on that. Just take a quick glimpse of it and then start looking at the world the way you want to see it, and then start being that.
Yeah. No, I love that. So now teach me a little bit about kind of what you do in the workplace and how you're helping companies. Because, one of the things that why I was so excited to talk to you was because I'd never really knew that trauma really got brought up in the workplace. Because, granted, I haven't been, the last time I was in corporate was like 8 years ago at this point. But even then, it wasn't really talked about. I had my teams that I knew that I was I'd opened like the old open door policy, but I just talked to my people about what's going on outside of their lives, because I realized that like if I didn't do that, and you came in, I could tell you've been crying, and I didn't address it, like your work's gonna suffer all day. So I did that, but I didn't know there's people like you out there informing these companies about trauma and how it affects the workplace. So maybe talk to me a little bit about, one, how did you start doing that for these companies, and then what kind of companies maybe are bringing you in, and some of the things that you do for them.
Absolutely. So, again, bring my old world of computer science. That's my degree. That's been my career for 20 plus years. I won't age myself a little there, but that's what I did. And for me, what I did with that world was, my role is to go into a company, assess it, right? Figure out, the company would bring myself in and say externally, we want to adjust our payroll system, our shipping system, our ordering processing system, evaluate it, figure out the gaps in there, tell us what we're doing wrong, give us this big report, give us recommendations on how we can fix it, and then help us create a system to actually implement it, and then train our staff on how to do it, right? That's the IT world. With this, I'm like, why don't I do that exact same thing, except around trauma-informed care? It's the exact same process. It's just putting a humanization factor in place on this, right? So in other words, almost every company has a wellness program. They'll have, and it stood out to me because when I was going through this, I sat back with myself and thought, when I was going through this, what did I need? What was available to me? Well, what was available to me through the wellness programs is they would give me a pedometer that would measure how many steps I took, right? And then I'd get reward points for it. Go work out, and if you worked out 3 times a week, you got some reward points for it. So you could go buy yourself a coffee machine or something in the workplace intranet, right? None of that helped me. Like, how does that help me when I don't even know how to survive, right? I don't need a coffee machine. I don't need to know how many steps I'm going to take. I'm not thinking about working out because I'm trying not to die, right? So none of those wellness pieces impacted or affected or were relevant to my life at that moment. As well as EAP programs. So for those that don't know what that is, that's employee assistance programs. A lot of corporates have that. They pay for that for their employees. What is an employee assistance program? That is basically like a glorified Google. They partner with attorneys, certain amount of counselors, certain amount of financial advisors. If you're going through something, you can call this 800 number, tap in for, say, counseling. You get like 5 sessions for free, right? Or an attorney, you get a couple of consulting sessions for free. Great resource, absolutely amazing. However, they don't go to the extension. You're causing a person that's going through trauma to do one more task. They've got to now reach out to this place. They've got to now schedule it. They've got to now do their due diligence when they're already in a heightened stress. Not only that, but 3 or 4 sessions is not going to overcome a whole lifetime of things that they've got to get through, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of unknowns, things that EAPs don't offer, such as, I got to move. I got to move from this place to that place. Where am I going to move to? How am I going to come up with the first month's, say, rent or deposit or whatever that looks like? EAPs don't help with that. What if I found a place, but I need a moving company to help me move and I don't got the money, resources to do that? EAP is not helping that. Where does that come from? So all of those intricacies. Also, the one-on-one simple counseling that is just needing that ear at say 2 a.m. An EAP company is not there for that. You got to schedule a counselor next Thursday at 2 p.m., right? Well, I'm going through a mental breakdown right now at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, right? So all of those pieces were not there in place when I was going through it. And that's exactly what I needed. So I decided to say, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to insert myself in that way. And how do I do that? I go into a place of business and I do an assessment of what do they have? What do you got for policies and procedures for somebody dealing with this type of thing? Domestic violence spilling into the workplace, right? Well, most companies have boilerplate type policies. Like, well, we'll give you the EAP number, we'll give you a brochure with some shelter information or local resources. And then they kind of wash their hands of it. There's no training to, as you said, you personally took it onto yourself, but were you formally trained by your company on how to have these dialogue conversations? Chances are no, right?
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So, and executive staff, they don't even know. They're disconnected, right? And what does that mean to their bottom dollar? So again, like in the IT world, I would always say, well, this is how much the system is costing you and how much money you're wasting by not doing it a different way. So same thing here applies. I let them know you could be costing your company thousands, if not millions of dollars to your bottom line by not addressing this, by pulling the cover over your eyes. Why, they ask? Well, for example, simply put, some of these mass shootings, a lot of them, the business case studies, when I look into them, are because of an external partner that came in and shot up the place, right? A lot of these cases that if you look into them. So now let's think about this. If you were, say, customer facing a Starbucks, for example, or around me, there was a bank. There were 7 individuals that were killed. If I'm a customer of that bank and I happen to be standing in that bank facility when the teller, one of the tellers, unfortunately, her ex showed up and she had been dealing with this, came and shot up the place. Now I got shot and I got killed or just harmed. I can sue, or my family can sue now that bank in my place. That's one lawsuit. The average lawsuit settles for $850,000. It's almost $1 million just in one case alone. And that's if they settle, not to say if they win or multiple instances. Not only that, the employees, how many times they can be sued for that. There's also fines. So companies have to adhere to a General Duties Act. General Duties Act through OSHA, typically people think is, construction sites or food restaurant places when it comes to OSHA. No, that is every business. What does the General Duties Act mean? Did you, in fact, do everything in your power to keep your employees safe? And if you have not, that's
does that include emotionally safe?
It's not just emotionally safe. It's what can incur because of that safety negligence, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, in other words, to say emotionally is a tricky thing, right? Because you can't prove necessarily.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's hard to measure, like did I keep my employees emotionally safe?
Yes, exactly. But what can happen, for example, is I'm dealing with this type of situation as an employee and you are my manager or HR, whoever in the company, and that information is made known, or even if you think, well, if I don't know about it, again, covering yourself with a blanket, with what I don't know won't hurt me. Well, what you don't know is if you don't acknowledge it or leave that open space for that dialogue for me to come to you, my partner now is showing up to work in the parking lot and you don't even know it because I'm not feeling comfortable to tell you about it. When if I would have been comfortable to tell you, you could have put me to a different location, changed my hours, put up, if there's security, depending on your type of industry, there's private security, could have that security be aware of that type of car, that person, that plate number that should not be around, the reception area to know if that person should be there or not. So by not acknowledging all of those things, you might have somebody that comes in and now you could have prevented it, right? But you didn't.
Yeah.
So those are those types of things that I prove to them, right? I show them hard dollars. What is this going to cost you? And typically I'll let them know when they think, well, we've never had it happen here, so therefore it's not an issue. I like to go into companies and I count while I'm sitting there walking from point A, the front door, to the office or conference room I'm going to. I count the smoke detectors and fire extinguishers. And my first question is, how many fires? How many times has this building burned down? Of course, the answer is, what are you talking about? It hasn't. Well, I noticed I counted 8 smoke detectors and 6 extinguishers. Why do you have them if it's there? Like, why would that be there? Well, just in case. Proving my point. Just in case.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So,
that's a good sales pitch. I like that, Brandie.
So, I mean, but it's true, right? And then when I use the case of the bank, for example, if I was that customer and say I didn't get hurt, I was sitting at home, but I see on the news that my bank just had this happen. 7 people lost their lives. Guess where I'm going to pull my money from? That bank, and I'm going to take it elsewhere. My business is going to go elsewhere. Starbucks. I'm not going to go visit Starbucks at that location on the corner because that situation happened over there. I'm not going to go to Starbucks anymore. And however, right, now imagine if that company has done due diligence and they make it known that, hey, these are the things that, and it's a benefit we offer our employees, blah, 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 blah. That makes me want to go to that business. I want to now go to Starbucks. Maybe I used to go to Caribou Coffee, but Caribou Coffee doesn't really do this extension benefit to their employees. Starbucks does. I'm going to spend my money at Starbucks. Right? Or I want to work.
Well, I think another angle that you kind of bring up, that I don't know how much you talk to the companies about this, but I would imagine if you do train, let's say managers, for example, on how to at least facilitate, hey, I know about trauma, what next, right? You're going to have a way more emotionally intelligent manager. And I would imagine like a way more effective like team. Like there's so many benefits that go down the line. That's not just, hey, if trauma happens, you guys know how to handle it and you won't get sued. But I would imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, Brandie, but if you train me again on how to deal with my employees, my subordinates, whatever, going through trauma, I'm probably going to be a way better emotionally intelligent manager, which is going to lead to more productivity on my team. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And that is the piece that is, again, part of that assessment. So my approach is I start from the top down. Just like I would in software, I talk to the executive team, find out what they think they have, what their procedures are, how they feel their employees feel. I go through all that. Then I meet with, of course, HR, and then I meet with, supervisors, managers. Then I meet with the actual employees. How do they feel that their company's doing? And there's always, just like in software, a disconnect, right, between what the company thinks the systems are doing versus what the reality of how the system actually works. So I do the same thing in this manner, and I take it down the line. And what trainings have they provided? What types of workshops? What types of conversations? What types of consistent language is used across the board? So if I leave your team and I'm with you, Raylan, and you have that emotional intelligence and you're telling me one thing, now I move to a different team. Does that same supervisor manager have the same linguistic messaging when they speak with me or I speak with them? Are they keen on the awareness of what to look for, right? How to handle that? And now I always stress, you're not counselors. You're not supposed to be a counselor, but to pick up on things or to know how to word things. For example, if somebody has experienced trauma, and not even just necessarily domestic violence, it could be because they had been in a horrific car accident, or they lost a family member, or they have dealt with terminal illness with a family member, or they're dealing with it themselves, type of thing. And so there's trauma in general, is what I'm getting at. The emotional intelligence when you speak to somebody. So for example, you may be my manager and you come up to me today and you kind of lean over my desk and like, Brandie, where is this report at? How come you didn't get it done? Why can't you get this done by 1:00? You may freak me out. You've stunned me. I will go in the bathroom and cry for an hour because I'm like, oh my gosh, it triggers me. Now I've lost an hour of my day, right? Unproductive. I come back to my desk. I'm discombobulated. I don't put in the data correctly. I have a terrible outcome for a report, for example. That makes you look bad, right? All because you did something that you didn't even realize. You didn't even know that when you spoke to me like that, or you came up to me and you're like, what the heck's wrong with you? Those words themselves trigger. But if you've been taught and gone to training and workshops provided by your company, it teaches you to say, hey, if you recognize something's wrong, or in general, even just in general, not even that something's wrong, but you just say, hey, so what's going on with you? How can I help? That is a much different conversation than what's wrong with you and me feeling defensive and defeated, right? So it's those trainings and those workshops that we do.
Yeah, those workshops, I feel like those are so important, especially today. Like, I mean, people get upset about even the littlest things today, but also on the big things. Again, I don't know where I picked this up, but I was a young manager. Like, my first managing job, I was like 23, 24. I had no idea what I was doing. But what I did was I just played dumb, but I realized that was a really good tactic for me. I just played dumb. So, like, for example, if Brandie doesn't get a report in on time or does what she's supposed to do, I always just play dumb and go, Brandie, I'm sorry. Like, I might have screwed this up, but like, I thought you were supposed to get this done. Like, what happened? Did I screw something up? But what would happen is, inevitably, if something was going on at home or whatever, they'd always say, hey, yeah, can I talk to you in your office? I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, but I always just play dumb as if like they didn't, like I screwed it up, but they just opened the door all the time for people to come to me, which I loved. And what I found was I had this one example. Again, if you're listening to this, you work in corporate, don't do what I did. Again, I was really young. I was stupid and I should have got fired for this. But so this woman got really, really upset with me because payroll got screwed up. And by that, I mean, she thought she was getting more hours than she did. And so she's like irate and she's like cussing at me. And it wasn't like her. And so I closed the door and I said, well, first of all, I think you know this. Don't do that ever again in public. But obviously something's going on. Like, talk to me. Like, let's figure this out. What's going on? Turns out she promised her kids shoes for the new school year and she couldn't afford it because she thought she was going to get more money. This is the part that I say, don't ever do what I did. And I didn't know you're not like allowed to, but I just gave her my card and I said, hey, go and get the kids shoes and I made a joke and do me a favor. Mom used to do this. Don't go to fucking Goodwill. Like, go to Nike, get the shoes that they want. Okay. Like, it's cool. Well, anyway, after that, Brandie, she was literally, and I was a newer boss there. I had like 40 employees or whatever. She became my biggest advocate. I could, Brandie, give the worst idea in the world. And she'd be like, let's do it. Like, she was gung-ho. But all it was is because I listened to her. And I told her I understood. Like, that was literally all I did. And obviously I gave her like $200. But besides that, I feel like.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Reland. And that's exactly what I express to companies. I'm like, you will make the most loyal employees, not only for themselves, but they will shout you out from the mountaintops. They are your biggest sales pitch for recruiting. Every company is all about recruiting, right? And getting great talent. So number one, you get this extra benefit. They really show that they care about the employees. But number two, if somebody ever actually needed that service and used that service, they're going to be like, hey, I went through it and this is what they did. They used this service. Not only, they helped me directly through my manager was able to handle the situation, but they also had a case management piece that really just was boots on the ground that helped me through this. They really care about their employees. It's not even, honestly, I could go somewhere else and make $10 extra an hour. I'll stay here because this company cares. And they will stay there. They will, do everything in their power. They're extremely productive. So again, it all comes down to bottom line. I know when I speak with companies, unfortunately, you want them to have the human factor all the way around, but it all comes down to dollars, right? So you got to speak dollars and cents. So for me, I was that, top level person at one point where I was more dry about, okay, what's it going to cost me, right? What's the dollar? At the end of the day, what's the dollar amount? I've learned, obviously, through a journey that it's not even about that dollar amount. It is, but it isn't. It is, but you can put that humanistic approach on there and you'll gain more dollars by being human to your company, because it is all about your employees. If you don't have employees, tomorrow you wake up and walk in and the building's empty, you have no product, you have no service, therefore no customers, right? So you have to make sure that you do that. You really have to maintain that piece with your employees. We have to think about doing wellness differently. even in the fact of today where all these companies, a lot of these companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter, they're all laying off hundreds of thousands of people. People are freaked out, right? They're in that trauma, fight or flight mode. One key factor that employers aren't thinking about is not only the fact of losing your job, right? That's just an issue right off the top. But a lot of those employees are like me, right? So what does that look like? Brandie went through trauma. Brandie needed a job. She was a single mother. Her income was everything. So her income, if it was not there, she didn't survive with her kids, right? Yeah, there's some assistance out there, but let's be honest. If your assistance doesn't cover your mortgage, your gas for your car, food, anything that you may need, and that's not talking living lavishly, that's just bare basic. So what does that tell somebody like that has gone through, say, domestic violence? That tells that person, I can't do it on my own. This is why I should have never left. This is why I should go back to that person, because at least we had two incomes. At least they were my backup. Who cares? We start thinking and justifying in our brain and overshadowing the fact that I could have died. I could have lost my life.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I'm like, the reality is I need money. And so companies aren't realizing that there's that extra factor of when there's layoffs and things like that. They're just like, oh, these people are a number. We just need to watch our bottom line. Let's cut off a bunch of people. And I do get it. That happens in business. But there are other factors that the employees that are left behind. So for example, you lose your job and, half my staff loses their job. I'm still here. Guess what I start feeling like? A number, right? I feel like a number. I'm on pins and needles at work. I don't know if I'm going to come in tomorrow. My job's gone. I'm freaking out. I also then start reliving. That's a triggering moment from my past to start bringing in like, uh-oh, what does this mean? This means I'm not good enough. This means da-da-da-da-da, and snowball effect. So again, employers need to address these types of conversations and have consistent conversations across the board. So every manager, everybody knows how to intelligently have these conversations, which is where emotional intelligence, learning how to be emotional intelligent. It's not a key phrase. It's not a trendy word. It's how do you do it and do it effectively.
We'll also love, for you, Brandie, if you went into, the same company I used to work for closed. I had the fortunate opportunity to shut down 2 of the locations and let go of all the employees. And what was most interesting about that experience was they got on a Zoom call with us, the leaders, and said, hey, let go of all these people and shut things down. And they gave us a piece of paper for severance and those kind of things, and that was it. There was no talk about how do I have this conversation, number one. There was not, I don't know how to do any, again, at this time, I'm only 27 years old or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know how to, I've let go of people before, but never mass letting people go. I'm talking, I did 20 exit interviews in a row. And it'd be interesting, and I'm curious if you've done these type of engagement with companies where you come in and you train people hey, this is how you should have this conversation to prevent trauma for them and try to ease that transition. Because again, I was fortunate that I had a heart to some degree, but because there is this balance of you can't do too much sympathy, because then it becomes a crying fest in your office. You got to get to the next person, and then it's going to be even more. And then also you can't be too short though, because it's you're heartless. So it's where is that balance? Do you do that for companies? I feel like that if you don't, people need that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that's a pivoting factor with E3 too, is having that service is just those conversations, right? How do you have those thoughtful conversations, as you said, in that balance, right? Because places need that. They do. You can't, because otherwise it's the morale you leave behind. You can't say, well, I'm letting go of 1,000 people or whatever, 10,000 people. And then the people that are left behind see how you treated those 1,000 people. So that,
yes, because that was the hard part, Brandie, for me, was I was left with employees, and every day it was hey, I'm going to get fired. And I'm having to calm everybody down, saying hey, no one's going to go anywhere. And then literally I had to let go of more people. It was but I didn't know how to handle the people that were left.
Yeah, helping the employer understand what does that mean. So I'll give you a personal example. Years ago, this is IT related. I was working at a company, gave my all, heart and soul. They loved me, all this stuff. I just happened to move and gave them more than ample time to know that I was moving. I was a new mother. I said when I do move 7 months from now, I'm not going to continue on. So there was those types of conversations I'd had. I tried to be very, and I said, I'll be, when that time gets closer, I'll even help train up another person. I was being very, 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 very thoughtful as the employee side. The employer, however, out of the blue, I had a company car, lived out of state, brought it down. My husband at the time was, we had made arrangements, but they literally just kind of, quote, dropped me off and left me and said, yeah, sorry, and I'm like, wait, like they treated me like I was nothing out of the blue. And I'm like, are you serious? Is this a joke? And no, they were not kidding. They left me high and dry, just kind of standing there. And to the point where one of the other people gave me a ride to get a rental car, paid for their rental car for me to even get back home. That's how bad it was. What that did, though, the other employees, now I was in IT, so think about the securities, right? The other employees said, we saw how they treated you. And a couple of those employees had all the access to all the servers. They did some damage there. They took all the data, they deleted stuff, they did all this stuff, which is customer information. They did all that stuff, and then they quiet quit it. They left. And they said, we're not going to allow them to have a chance to do what they did to you. So we're going to kind of destroy them internally and then take off, and it'll take them a long time to get back up to speed on their systems. They're going to cost them clients, all this stuff. So that's in the IT world. It's a very big thing, or cybersecurity. People can plant viruses, all of these things. So you got to think about how are you mindful with those employees, because that's what you're leaving behind. Or the employees that left could come back and unfortunately do damage, harm, come into the company, as we've seen, again, shootings, things like that. So it's about that balance, and how do you do it and do it right and do it effectively, right? So yeah, those are the types of services that, we help address, and having those conversations. It's a full circle effect, right? So it's putting the human factor into these conversations.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm a huge fan of what you do, and again, coming from someone that had that experience, what you're doing is obviously incredibly important, and I think that obviously you're a huge inspiration to the people out there that have gone through any type of trauma, not just domestic violence, but also in the workplace. I love people like you because you're changing the way that we can operate with our own employees. They're changing the way that companies work, and it's more hands-on than just, hey, manager throws on a Simon Sinek fucking video, right? Like I love what you're doing, so I appreciate that. And yeah, we're up on our time. So any final thoughts before we jump out of here, Brandie? This time flew by fast.
Yeah. Well, I want to say first off, thank you so much again for having me as a guest and having this open dialogue. I think it's very important that you have guests like myself that are things that are shared with the public that may not otherwise know about services like this, and really having that platform. So I want to say thank you to that.
Yeah, of course. All right, for anyone that's interested in learning more about what Brandie does, check the description below. And once again, thanks for listening. Stay elevated and stay motivated. See ya. Thank you for listening to The Elevated Entrepreneur. If you want to check out more about the guest, look at the description below. And as always, if you're a beginner coach or even someone that's seasoned and you're looking to join a community of like-minded individuals, learn about branding, lead generation, sales, you name it, think about applying to the Elevated Coaches Academy. You can learn more about that in the description below. I look forward to having you in the next episode. We'll talk to you soon. Stay motivated, stay elevated.